Hello, and welcome to The Source Within with Chloe Pedalino, where I share the source within me with hopes it sparks the source within thee. Hello, and welcome to The Source Within with Chloe Pedalino. Today, we are going to talk about the controversy and debate over whether or not Atlantis existed in brief, really discuss more about the truth of Atlantis and its existence, and some myth busting around some myths that we have been told for the past periods of time around Atlantis. And we're going to talk about the first war that ever occurred on Earth and as a human civilization. So without further ado, let's get started. I think to start, yes, there's a lot of controversy about, okay, did Atlantis exist or did it not exist? I think this is in several parts. One, we have very limited written history about the existence of Atlantis, and likely that's because it was destroyed in the fires of the Library of Alexandria in, I think, 3rd century BC was the first time that occurred, and then it happened a couple of times after the era of Jesus Christ. So we have really limited information about Atlantis. Over the past, 10, 15, maybe longer years, Atlantis keeps coming up as a topic of discussion. People are interested in it. People are curious about it. Perhaps on our subconscious levels within our beings that are maybe waking up to at this point in our history, in our civilization, that we are humans are kind of waking up to basically be like, okay, it's time to start remembering what happened with Atlantis. It's time to start discussing it, revisiting it. And I think we are supposed to do that as a civilization in order to learn and remember so many of the incredible knowledge and advancements in technology that the Atlanteans really had. So to me, this collective curiosity about Atlantis is even a further indicator to me that, the Atlantis likely very much existed. I think that we as a civilization and as beings on some level have this fascination because we know that it actually is true and it actually exists. My most recent or kind of amazement and learning about Atlantis was through Initiation, which is a Gaia, it's on the Gaia app, Gaia. Gaia is also known as Mother Earth, just in case those of you who may not know that. And it's by Matias de Stefano. And Matias de Stefano is somebody that is actually in this lifetime has been able to remember his past lives and existences. And so he speaks about Atlantis in remembering the time that he lived and existed there. And so a lot of this information that I have gathered is from his remembering of that time in Atlantis. And I'll put the information in the show notes as well about what that reference is. Initiation, it's amazing, by Matias de Stefano. I strongly recommend people check it out. So in our previous episode, we had talked about, essentially, we had these 4 different species that were from off-planet that came to Earth and essentially wanted to help develop this species of humans on Earth, help Earth as a planet and as humans as a civilization progress. And so we were around the time of 15,000 BC, and this is when the Atlanteans kind of, or maybe it was a little bit before this, I don't know exactly, but around this time that Atlanteans were starting to be born. And remember, they were the first sons of the man, of basically the humans that procreated with the Aesir, the Ayunaki, who were off planet. Their planet was dying, came to planet Earth. And so Atlanteans were the sons of basically the procreation between the Homo sapiens erectus and the Ayunaki, who had come to the Middle East and lived there. Now, what occurred was is Arcturians, who are other off-planet species. Well, I'll leave it for that for now. They came and they taught the Atlanteans about the power of the planet, and that the power of the planet was in the consciousness of the planet, and that in order for them to succeed as an awakened civilization, that they needed to basically connect with the consciousness of the planet. And if you remember from what I mentioned before, essentially there are portals throughout the planet where at that time it was considered that information about the universe was being stored in these different portals. And this is related to, I mentioned before, a path of the snake, and essentially there's a kundalini energy and this snake that connects these various points on Earth. There are various portals between us as a planet and us as a human civilization, and let's say off planet beings, as well as other dimensions and galaxies that contain other dimensions is I guess a way I'll frame it. And okay, but what also happened is that the Atlanteans, developing their own civilization, they started believing that they could develop a better world than the Ayunaki. They wanted to conquer them. They wanted to be the Atlanteans. Eventually it became where they wanted to be the ones in power and control. And the disagreement between the Atlanteans and the IC or Ayunaki was about going within and using our internal powers versus ascension and development or evolution by going outside oneself and relying fully on essentially connecting off planet, rather than kind of as humans developing our own internal systems and strengths and abilities. And so what happened is that there were 12 families that were determined, basically 12 families, and these were like the initial Atlanteans that were assigned and determined. And now I will just say this briefly. What's interesting about this and what comes up, is one, the number and the idea of this, because 12 is the number of disciples Jesus had. But okay, so eventually the Ayunaki wanted to open up portals to connect to the stars. And so they believed that in order to do this, that they needed to open up all of the portals over Earth, all of the portals on Earth that connected us to the stars or to kind of the off-planet species and realms, let's say. So around 16,000 BC is when they had selected these basically 12 families of whom they procreated with, humans that they procreated on Earth. And so the sons of the children of the initial grouping of procreating between the off-planet Ayunaki and the Homo sapiens erectus at that point in time. So the children of that first generation, 12 families of those were selected not as rulers at the time, but as to populate essentially the planet and to spread out over these portals to populate the planet. Now, so the initial Atlanteans started populating in the Canary Islands, Green Cape, and then further over elsewhere. But the initial, like the home and the heart, the center of Atlantis and the Atlantean Empire was really in the Canary Islands. So they were taught now, so as they're kind of spreading out, these Atlanteans, and they know some about the portals of the planet, there starts becoming this disagreement between in the Middle East and then these 12 families who were supposed to be working essentially for the Ayunaki. But then over time, these Atlanteans started thinking differently, essentially, than the Ayunaki who had initially breeded with them. So the Atlanteans were actually taught by another species of off-planet species, the Arcturians, about the power of the planet and the consciousness and being at those portals. And were taught that they needed to go and reach all of these portals in order to help this awakening to the planet. And they believed to help their own awakening as individuals. And again, this is where there was a disagreement. The belief between the Arcturians that then the Atlanteans adopted was that the planet and civilization could achieve awakening by going inward versus the Ayunaki who believed that the awakening of the planet or self would be through going through the stars. This is where the disagreement started to be made. So what happened was is that the Atlanteans started crossing over the planet, started Morocco to Spain, to the Himalayas, and they kept traveling down, ultimately would wrap around to go through Alaska, through and then down through the Americas on the west to middle of the North America, down through South America, through the tail, landing kind of in southernmost through Central America and then going down towards South America, landing at the end of the tail. And in doing so, the Atlanteans started to dominate. And at the time, there were still other civilizations. The Mu were there. Mu or Lemurian were guarding around Easter Island, and which was another area of a portal, and essentially the Mu, who were very gentle beings, ended up just kind of leaving and going underground. But the Mu were really important actually for Atlanteans because the Mu taught humans about how to use vibration and sound and the actual technologies around vibration and sound. And they helped the Atlanteans develop structures such as pyramids that were great conductors of energy and of communication between civilization on Earth and those of off planet. They essentially were able to teach these how sacred geometry worked and how certain structures and certain shapes worked, and understood how using pyramids and placing them in certain places with the power of and energy of vibration at that time was actually considered like the first Wi-Fi. So basically they were able to use sound and vibration as and the incredible technology behind that, along with pyramids being placed in certain places on the Earth. And in doing that, it was kind of the first Wi-Fi that existed. And that technology was used to do incredible healings. You could contact other beings throughout time and space. Structures could be built. So, for example, Mythbuster, the pyramids were actually built by using the power of vibration and the sound of voice, by incanting, by chanting certain sounds as a collective group. They were actually able to move these really incredibly heavy stones. What else? It also, this energy of vibration can be used to like regenerate cells in the body. So very, very powerful. It was basically they were intending to go around these portals and increase the frequency of our planet through sound and vibration in a way that we could communicate with other planets, that other planets could listen to and understand what was going on in our world on planet Earth, and then we could also do the same. We could connect and listen in to them on other planets. So the Mu, who again eventually went underground, were the ones that taught Atlanteans about the technology of vibration and sound, and which had incredible powers. Now, all right, so the Ayunaki told Atlanteans, hey, go out, populate the world. We want you to take over and kind of manage these portals on Earth, because the Ayunaki said, we think it's really important that we're going to send as a planet by connecting off planet. We're going to connect off planet to do that. The Atlanteans, the 12 families were chosen as kind of keepers and safeguarders of this. And so they travel all over the world to these different portals. And however, while doing this, they're starting to learn more and more information about their powers and abilities and about the use of the technology of vibration and sound. And they start questioning, and in fact don't agree with the Ayunaki about what the way is to reach evolution. They believe that all of that energy should remain on Earth, and they want to be the ones now that are taking over power and control of the planet. And this was the first introduction of polarity. Polarity is the idea that there are two ends, there are two opposing ends. And so here, we had two civilizations now who were against each other geographically. You had the Ayunaki, predominantly stationed in the Middle East, and then you have the Atlanteans who had spread now over more to the west. And essentially, they started fighting each other to determine who was going to be ruling the world. So what happened is the Atlanteans essentially use the power of sound, light, energy, frequency, vibration, understood how to use these, and understood these technologies, and created essentially an atomic bomb, or the power of one, at least, by they created these structures and these pillars, along with the placement of pyramids again throughout certain areas in the world. And what they did is they kind of collected all of this energy into one area, this incredibly condensed energy coming in to one area. It kind of reminds me of the Big Bang, essentially all of this pressure of this condensed of this energy moving towards one kind of central spot location. It's almost like there's so much pressure that builds as the energy is narrowed to one place. What happened is that essentially when all that energy went to that one space, it created the force, as I said, of the energy and the force of an atomic bomb, and similar to the explosion of the Big Bang, where everything was compressed into to nothing, and then that extreme pressure exploded out. That is in some ways what happened with these structures of resonance that they created, the Atlanteans. And then once that energy was drawn into this one spot, it essentially dissolved and turned everything around it to dust. So they eliminated, like, I mean, just it decimated. It went from existence to just nothing through essentially it was destroyed through vibration. Pulled out the Lemurians who were still in existence, the Mu who were still in existence, and the Ayunaki, they essentially kind of pulled them in. And once they were around or in that area, then they released this incredible energy and vibration that destroyed everything in their path. And it didn't go like right away, however. So this was the first war. This was the first destruction that ever had happened on our planet. And after they used this incredible energy, and it's much more specific and advanced, but I'm not getting into all of the total specifics of it, but essentially this is the first war. This incredible essentially decimation happened. My understanding is it didn't fully knock out the entire world just at one time. It decimated whatever area within distance of proximity to where this energy and this force was concentrated. And so yes, that it is true that destroyed a lot of the ancient civilization of Atlantis and artifacts, which is the reason why we don't have any artifacts, and there aren't many temples that are still in existence, and there aren't many pyramids that are still in existence. What was in existence was far, far, far more than what we have currently discovered on Earth now. But again, the reason that is because a lot of it was destroyed by this first war that ever happened. So in some ways, there aren't artifacts from that time because they were destroyed. Now, I believe, as I said, I believe that it wasn't like just overnight that it was totally destroyed. Then it took some time, and ultimately there became the climate change and volcanoes, and then it became underwater and water took over more. But this didn't happen just immediately. In fact, So the Atlanteans still had a piece of energy, and apparently they brought this energy. I'm not sure how they got it or transported it, but essentially they brought some of this kind of this remaining energy that they had apparently to over to Ethiopia, and then I do believe eventually to Egypt. And there was mention of something of the Ark Covenant being something that they traveled with. Now, I'll speak to that a little bit later in different episodes. That it is something to keep in mind is what is this Ark Covenant that they were talking about? What does that really mean? Could it be the same as the Emerald Tablets that Hermes Toth wrote about, which we'll speak about in next episode, or is that something else? So what are the takeaways about Atlantis in general? I mean, Atlantis was very much a real society, a real civilization. Number one. We don't have any evidence of it naturally because one, it was a very long time ago, 15,000 years ago, but that's not the only reason. Also, the reason is because the level of this war that occurred between the Atlanteans and the Ayunaki essentially demolished and destroyed anything or a lot of what would have been remnants from Atlantis, and everything went underwater. So it's not super surprising that we don't have much history on it. Additionally, we don't have much history on it because the libraries of Alexandria that hosted any prior records of history and ancient civilizations we would have had, those were also destroyed and burned. So what I am saying is that yeah, we don't have direct records or direct evidence of it. However, Mateus's story, people, you know, starting to collectively, on some sort of collective consciousness level, start talking about and wondering about Atlantis is also an indication that yes, this was part of our history. It also is important to note that this was the first war that ever existed in humanity. And what Matias de Stefano argues and or explains in his episodes of initiation is that we collectively still have humanity as a civilization collectively still have this memory of these two significant civilizations fighting, from west and east, this separateness between this west and east, this divide, and we have a memory of this conflict and separation between west and east, fighting between west and east based on different ways of thinking and believing, and that it's in our blood, in our memory as a civilization and culturally that there's a war that existed. And he also goes on to say that it's that all subsequent wars really are remedy, repair, or because the initial war of Atlantis kind of was never addressed. And that all subsequent wars are this kind of repeated battle and fighting because it's kind of instilled within us this memory of East and West fighting based on separateness of ideas and belief systems, which I find to be a very interesting idea and theory, and wonder if and how if we can learn it all from the mistake of the Atlanteans who used their gifts essentially and abilities and this knowledge that they were given of these powerful tools and technologies, including sound and vibration, and essentially misuse those. And I'm curious, again, if and what that directs us or informs us as a civilization moving forward when we think about war. And do we really need war? If we start thinking about, oh my gosh, we are just replaying out this pattern that literally happened thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, is there a way to restructure? Is there a way to repair? Is there a way to address that so that this war, my notion of war between East and West and different ways of thinking, doesn't continue to repeat itself and manifest throughout time. So that was part of what we learned from the Atlanteans, or what we may learn. What we may learn. What I am sharing with you now, I'm curious if we will learn, and if having this information and understanding war and conflict from and with this context, if this does really, if this can or will impact how we proceed and how we address war going forward. The Atlanteans and what we gained from them was not all was not all negative or detrimental. They did end up winning the war. They did proceed onwards and continue to download what they believed to be important information throughout these portals through the planet. And if not made clear already, again, the Atlanteans were a very advanced civilization, very advanced, in technology, in agriculture, in the arts. They passed down. We really inherited a lot of what we knew in those early times about arts and crafts, about philosophy, about technology, and how to develop, create, and build civilizations that were prosperous and that were successful. Though those who at that time, the spiritually illuminated, what's referred to as, quote, the spiritually illuminated initiates, I'm going to quote here, seeing where Atlantis was going, withdrew from the ill-fated continent, carrying with them sacred doctrine, and established in Egypt, where they became its first divine rulers. And this is taken from History of Civilization. I think I'm getting that incorrect, but I will put that in the show notes. And so what is that referring to is that some of these select, less corrupt Atlanteans, yes, so the Atlanteans won, they kind of went on to wanting to rule and conquer, but some who were more, spiritually inclined and enlightened, maybe, more advanced spiritually, they kind of removed themselves from that greater civilization and went to Egypt, in fact, asked to be accepted within Egypt at that time, which I've heard was one of the only cultures, civilizations, societies, I'm not sure what to say, at that time, who would accept people from Atlantis. Because again, they had this, they did this huge war. And so people kind of were looking about where to go. And again, with some of the most sacred Atlanteans, some of the most advanced, spiritually advanced, at least, Atlanteans ended up in Egypt. And when we talk about their advanced use of astrology, for example, I think it's generally widely known that the pyramids in Egypt that current exist today in Gaza and then in Luxor and Aswan in Egypt are aligned with specific star structures, with stars, specifically Orion. And so I think that's commonly understood that Egyptians were very advanced in working with star systems and planetary systems and understanding how to work with those to inform us as a civilization and to enhance us as a civilization. One other thing that I did not mention is that, yes, although that initial war destroyed a ton of history that came from the Atlanteans, subsequent, essentially, pyramids that might have been built at later times were all related to, in some way, the initial creations of from the Atlanteans. So the knowledge about how to make a pyramid and such would have been passed down through the times of Atlantis to then the Egyptians, and then those that traveled all over the world. So when we see pyramids and temples, not only in Egypt, but we see them in Central America, and we see them in Mexico, and we see them in Normandy, and we see these other structures in Britain and in China and other places of the world. Some of those could be very much related to, or at least the descendants of, when the Atlanteans traveled all over the world to look at all those portals did them when they were teaching the people that were there about what they were learning and about the power of vibration and sound and creating these structures that were portals and could um, transmute energy. So when we're seeing them in other areas in the world, we still can be thinking, okay, this technology was brought down through the Atlanteans and then passed down through time through different civilizations. And so that is really where the initial creation of these kinds of structures originated, was in Atlantis times. Thanks so much for joining me today and for opening your ears and mind to hearing a history that is different than what we have been taught for many, many years now. And I hope that by hearing some of this information, it awakens you or opens up your mind to new perspectives in such a grand and expansive and fabulous and exciting way, because there is so much more to talk about and so much more to learn here on The Source Within. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you back here next time.